The trading floor of the Zurich Stock Exchange is silent at 9:07 in the morning. Not the silence of concentration, not the focused quiet of professionals studying markets. This is the hollow, wrong kind of silence, the kind that happens when something that should be moving has completely stopped. 12 massive LED screens that normally pulse with cascading green and red price movements are frozen on a single message. Four languages, one meaning, access restricted. The traders are not scrambling. Nobody is shouting. Nobody is running. They are standing completely still, phones in hand, staring at screens that no longer recognize American corporate login credentials. Some of these people have worked this floor for 20 years. They have survived crashes and crises and moments of genuine financial terror. They have never seen anything like this. And here is the thing that makes it different from every crisis before it. Nothing broke, no system failed, no attack occurred. The infrastructure is working perfectly. It is simply, deliberately, surgically, with mechanical Swiss precision, no longer acknowledging that American entities exist. 47 of the most powerful corporations on Earth woke up on a Wednesday morning and discovered they had been quietly erased from the international financial system. Not hacked out, not frozen by sanctions. Administratively, bureaucratically. Through a 187-word statement that did not even mention the United States by name. And it all traces back to 11 minutes and 34 seconds in the White House Rose Garden. What you are about to hear is not a trade policy story. This is the story of the moment a small, neutral, landlocked country demonstrated that it possessed a form of leverage so complete and so invisible that the most powerful economy in human history did not even know it was vulnerable until it was already too late. Switzerland did not fire a weapon, did not impose a tariff, did not organize a coalition or file a complaint or issue a threat. Switzerland updated its due diligence protocols. 12 days later, the United States retreated. $340 billion. Gone. In 12 days. Because of 11 minutes in a rose garden. Stay with this. 72 hours before those Zurich screens went dark, President Trump stood at the Rose Garden podium and announced immediate punitive tariffs on Swiss pharmaceutical imports, luxury goods, and precision machinery, effective within 48 hours. The tariffs averaged 67%. He called Switzerland a currency manipulator. He used the phrase financial freeloaders. He said Switzerland would learn what happens when you take advantage of American patience. 11 minutes and 34 seconds. Warren Buffett would later call it the most expensive 11 minutes in modern American corporate history. In that moment, nobody in Washington understood what had just been set in motion. Markets dipped slightly. Journalists filed analysis pieces about trade tensions. Swiss officials issued measured statements. And Switzerland, a nation that has watched Napoleon, 2 world wars, the Cold War, and decades of American policy volatility pass through its borders without disrupting its institutions, quietly convened an emergency session. Because Switzerland had learned something across 140 years of careful institutional construction that Trump had not yet discovered. Measured responses outlast emotional ones. Every time, the Swiss Federal Council met for several hours. What emerged was a decision that would rewrite the rules of economic confrontation in the 21st century. And the most extraordinary part, they chose not to do what anyone expected. No reciprocal tariffs, no WTO filing, no coalition, no press conference, no drama of any kind. Just a quiet, clinically precise exercise of sovereign authority over the one domain where Switzerland does not merely participate in global finance. Switzerland operates it. At 6 in the morning Central European Time on Wednesday, midnight Tuesday in Washington, the exact moment Trump's tariffs took effect, the Swiss Federal Council released its response. 187 words. No mention of the United States. No mention of Trump. It noted that Switzerland would not engage in reciprocal tariff measures. Instead, Switzerland would exercise sovereign authority to determine which entities qualified for access to Swiss financial infrastructure based on Switzerland's independent assessment of banking standards, anti-money laundering compliance, and international sanctions coordination. Read that language slowly, because buried inside that bureaucratic precision is something devastating. Switzerland was not retaliating. On paper, Switzerland was conducting routine regulatory due diligence. 8 minutes later, UBS, Credit Suisse, Julius Baer, Pictet, and 23 smaller private banks received identical operational guidance. Correspondent banking relationships with entities from jurisdictions imposing discriminatory tariffs on Swiss exports would require enhanced review. Review timeline, 180 to 270 days, 6 to 9 months. The practical effect was instantaneous. 47 American corporations lost access to the international payment systems that make cross-border commerce possible. Not gradually, not with a warning. At the moment the guidance took effect, the access simply vanished. And these were not small companies. 3 Fortune 100 corporations, 8 major pharmaceutical manufacturers, 11 technology firms with significant European operations, 14 investment funds managing a combined $847 billion in assets, 11 industrial conglomerates with global supply chains requiring daily international settlements, combined annual revenue exceeding $1.7 trillion, combined market capitalization of $3.4 trillion. Every single one of them discovered Wednesday morning they could no longer execute international wire transfers, issue letters of credit, settle foreign exchange contracts, or access the trade finance facilities their operations required to function. To understand why this could not simply be routed around over a weekend, you need to understand what correspondent banking actually is. Because most people have never heard the term, and yet their medications, their supply chains, and their financial security depend on it every single day. When an American company pays a supplier in Jakarta, that transaction does not travel in a straight line. American banks and Indonesian banks do not hold accounts inside each other. They cannot speak directly. Instead, both maintain accounts at a neutral third institution, a correspondent bank, that holds multiple currencies, manages the settlement, and provides the trade finance instruments that give suppliers the confidence to ship goods before payment arrives. Switzerland became the dominant global correspondent banking center, not through luck, through 140 years of deliberate institutional construction. Swiss political neutrality, respected through 2 world wars and the Cold War, means Swiss banking infrastructure serves as the commons of international finance, a space where parties who distrust each other can still transact through a neutral intermediary both sides accept. Switzerland processes 27% of all cross-border interbank payments globally, more than $1 in 4 moving across international borders. Not because Switzerland is the largest economy, because Switzerland built and maintained the infrastructure of trust that international finance requires, and no equivalent alternative exists anywhere. Losing Swiss correspondent access is not like losing one bank. It is like losing the ability to participate in international commerce across 89 countries simultaneously. The pharmaceutical sector felt it first, and not in boardrooms. In pharmacy aisles in Memphis, 7 American pharmaceutical manufacturers discovered they could no longer purchase active pharmaceutical ingredients from suppliers in India and China. Generic drug production depends on chemical compounds manufactured in Asia and paid for through letters of credit issued by correspondent banks. Without those letters of credit, suppliers do not ship. 3 companies issued statements within 6 hours. They would exhaust existing ingredient inventory within 45 to 60 days. 45 to 60 days. 6 weeks to production shutdown. The affected companies produced medications generating 14.7 million prescriptions monthly. Antibiotics, blood pressure treatments, diabetes management drugs, cancer therapies, all of them facing disruption within 8 weeks, not because the ingredients did not exist, not because factories were not running, but because the payment mechanism that global pharmaceutical trade depends on had been suspended. Within 8 days, pharmacy shelves in Memphis showed quiet, creeping gaps. The blood pressure medication that occupied 3 shelf positions was down to 1. The diabetes treatment in 4 dosage options was down to 2. A small printed card appeared on the antibiotic shelf, temporary availability notice. Pharmacists fielded calls from patients asking why refills were on backorder. The pharmacist said supply chain disruption. Patients asked when medications would return. Pharmacists said they did not know. And neither the pharmacist nor the patient had any idea they were looking at the downstream consequence of 11 minutes in a rose garden. Meanwhile, 14 investment funds managing $847 billion were paralyzed in a different way. Unable to execute foreign exchange settlements for international portfolio rebalancing, they were locked into static positions while global markets moved. Tracking error accumulated. Client redemption requests totaled $41 billion in the first week alone. Fiduciary liability compounded daily. The industrial conglomerates faced something slower but more comprehensive. An aerospace manufacturer could not pay titanium suppliers in Kazakhstan. An automotive group could not settle contracts with electronics manufacturers in Taiwan. A construction equipment company could not purchase hydraulic systems from South Korea. Every cross-border transaction now required manual workarounds through smaller regional banks with higher costs, longer timelines, and credit limits wholly insufficient for these companies' transaction volumes. Mark was a logistics coordinator at one of those aerospace manufacturers. 19 years in international procurement, lunch at the same sandwich shop in Renton every Tuesday and Thursday. His daughter's soccer coach on weekends. On Wednesday morning at 7:47 Pacific Time, an automated system notification arrived. A routine $8.4 million payment to a titanium supplier in Kazakhstan. Rejected. Correspondent bank unavailable. He called the banking relationship manager. 6 minutes. UBS Zurich had suspended the relationship. Review timeline 6 to 9 months. Mark hung up, walked to his supervisor's office, and said 7 words that got repeated in 3 emergency meetings over the next 48 hours. We cannot build planes without Swiss banks. The market response was arithmetically merciless. The 47 affected companies declined an average of 11.3% in 2 trading days. 3 pharmaceutical companies lost a combined $67 billion in market capitalization. The largest affected technology company lost $94 billion. Credit rating agencies placed 23 entities on negative watch. Bond spreads widened 140 basis points. And the damage did not stay inside those 47 corporations. A precision machining company in Ohio, 340 employees, specialized aerospace components, received notice that all pending orders were suspended indefinitely. Those orders were 62% of annual revenue. 187 workers received layoff notices within 72 hours. Not because of anything they did, because their customer could not pay a titanium supplier in Kazakhstan, which meant it could not build aircraft, which meant it did not need their parts. 72 hours. From Rose Garden to Ohio factory floor, a chemical distributor in New Jersey lost $23 million in pharmaceutical contracts inside a week. A logistics software company watched its 3 largest clients freeze all new implementations. Neither had any relationship with Switzerland. Neither had made any decision that contributed to the situation. They were simply downstream of a confrontation they never saw coming and had no framework to survive. In Washington, the response moved through a predictable sequence: confusion, denial, and then the slow arrival at a reality the administration had not anticipated and did not have a framework to address. The Treasury Department called the Swiss action an unacceptable interference with American commerce and demanded immediate reversal. The State Department summoned the Swiss ambassador. The consultations lasted 37 minutes. The American delegation demanded immediate restoration and characterized the suspension as economic warfare. The Swiss ambassador responded that Switzerland had exercised sovereign regulatory authority consistent with established international banking standards. Reviews would be completed on a timeline determined by Swiss regulatory priorities, not American political demands, and then the ambassador added the sentence that defined the entire confrontation. If the United States found Swiss correspondent banking so essential to American corporate operations, perhaps the United States should have considered that dependence before imposing punitive tariffs on Swiss exports. Not a threat. A description of reality, and it was the most devastating thing said in that room. The National Security Council met Thursday afternoon for 4 hours and 18 minutes. Secretaries of State, Treasury, and Commerce, the National Security Advisor, the Director of National Intelligence, Defense, Justice. The topic was not whether to respond. It was how. Multiple options were discussed: sanctions on Swiss banks operating in the United States, restrictions on Swiss corporate access to American capital markets, freezing Swiss assets in Treasury securities. Every option hit the same wall. Switzerland was not Iran. Switzerland had deep institutional relationships with every major economy on Earth. Sanctioning Switzerland would not isolate Switzerland. It would isolate the United States from the correspondent banking networks those relationships enabled. The administration had built its entire response strategy on the assumption that American economic size translated into leverage in any confrontation. That assumption had just failed its first real test. The lobbying began immediately. The Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America sent a formal letter to the White House Friday, 48 hours in, requesting immediate tariff withdrawal. 14.7 million monthly prescriptions at risk. Production shut down within 6 to 8 weeks. The tariffs generated $2.3 billion annually in impact on Swiss exporters. The banking suspension threatened $847 billion in American pharmaceutical revenue. The letter used the phrase cost-benefit ratio not sustainable, which was the pharmaceutical industry's careful way of saying, you traded $2 billion for $847 billion and people will run out of blood pressure medication in 6 weeks. Congress moved with unusual speed. Republican senators from states hosting affected company facilities. Democratic senators who had criticized the tariffs from day one. Different starting points, identical conclusion within a week. The tariffs needed to be withdrawn immediately. 34 senators, bipartisan, joint letter, 7 days in. The corporate CEOs were having their own conversation. 6 of the largest affected company chiefs on a Sunday evening call lasting 2 hours and 11 minutes. Unanimous. Indefensibly. Survival required reversal. Their joint letter to the president stated plainly that if correspondent banking access was not restored within 30 days, they would be forced to consider relocating corporate domiciles to jurisdictions where Swiss relationships remained intact. 6 major American corporations signaling they would become non-American entities, not as a bluff, as a legal and fiduciary description of the decision tree their boards were required to navigate. The rest of the world watched with carefully concealed satisfaction. France's finance minister noted that nations imposing unilateral tariffs should anticipate responses reflecting the sovereign interests of affected parties. Japan's Ministry of Finance noted that cross-border commerce depends on neutral correspondent banking infrastructure operating free from political interference. Neither directly criticized the United States. Neither needed to. They were expressing recognition that Switzerland had demonstrated what every American trading partner had privately hoped someone would eventually demonstrate, that American tariff aggression was not cost-free. Warren Buffett spoke on Monday morning. Bloomberg interview, 41 minutes. 7 of them on Switzerland. In 67 years of watching markets and governments interact, he said, financial infrastructure is the most dangerous kind of dependency because it is invisible until it disappears. Military dependencies are obvious. Energy dependencies are measurable. Financial dependencies operate through networks so complex that policymakers do not recognize they exist until someone turns off access. Then you discover your entire economy was running on infrastructure you did not control, could not replace, and had just deeply offended. He continued. Switzerland did not need to match American tariffs, did not need to file WTO complaints, did not need to organize coalitions. Switzerland simply needed to exercise regulatory authority it already possessed and apply due diligence standards that are on paper completely reasonable. The effect was more devastating than any tariff because tariffs raise costs. Correspondent banking suspension eliminates capability. You can operate with higher costs. You cannot operate without the ability to transact across borders. His closing sentence was the one everyone quoted afterward. Switzerland recognized it held the leverage. Trump did not recognize Switzerland held the leverage until 47 American companies lost access to international banking. That is not strength meeting strength. That is someone who thought they had power discovering they had dependency. Tuesday morning, 10 days after the suspension, the White House issued a terse statement. The tariffs on Swiss pharmaceutical imports, luxury goods, and precision machinery would be suspended for 90 days pending bilateral consultations. The word suspended rather than withdrawn. No mention of correspondent banking. No acknowledgement of the crisis. No admission of what had actually driven the decision. But everyone understood the sequence. Trump threatened Switzerland on a Monday. By Wednesday, 47 American corporations lost international banking access. By the following Tuesday, the tariffs were withdrawn. The Swiss Federal Council issued an equally brief statement welcoming constructive engagement. The Swiss Financial Market Supervisory Authority commenced expedited review. Reviews completed within 72 hours. All 47 corporations regained full correspondent banking access by Friday afternoon. 12 days, start to finish. $340 billion in lost market capitalization, operational disruption, and reputational damage, compared to $2.3 billion in annual Swiss tariff impact. That arithmetic is not a rounding error. That is the precise empirical measurement of the distance between economic size and economic leverage. Trump tried to punish Switzerland. Switzerland revealed who actually depended on whom, and the infrastructure that made it possible. 27% of global cross-border interbank payments, built across 140 years, irreplaceable on any timeline measured in months or years, is still there. Exactly where it was. Processing transactions. Maintaining neutrality. Waiting. The dependency did not end when the crisis did. It never goes away. The question is simply whether the next confrontation will be with a party as measured and as reversible as Switzerland, or with someone who decides 12 days was not nearly long enough. That question does not have a reassuring answer, and the people who should be losing sleep over it are the same people who did not map the dependency until the screens in Zurich went dark. If this story made you think differently about where power actually lives in the modern world, drop a comment below, because this conversation is only getting more relevant. And make sure you are subscribed, because the stories that explain how the world actually works are exactly what this channel is built for.